The jungle moon breathed in layers of sound and color, thick with the hum of unseen life and the shimmer of glowing flora that pulsed gently in the darkness. Every vine on this world seemed to whisper secrets, slick with dew and soft with phosphorescent light, as if the planet itself never slept. Beyond the tree line, calls echoed strange, wet clicks and deep-throated growls that belonged to creatures no human had ever named. The air pressed down, heavy and wet, carrying the scent of damp earth and blossoms that only dared bloom under the twin suns' retreat. Inside a small vine-bound hut, the world felt suspended, a fragile shell of peace surrounded by the chaotic. Breath of the jungle. William sat at the center of it all, legs wide, forearms resting on the edges of a crude wooden table, his fingers methodically disassembling a shattered atmospheric sensor. Each movement was deliberate, the hands of a man who had repaired far worse in far more desperate places. His sleeveless tunic clung to his back, soaked through with the heat, but he paid it no mind. The low flicker of an oil lantern cast soft gold over the rough walls, painting him in shadows and light. It lit the hard lines of his jaw, the subtle scars etched along his arms, and the calm stillness in his eyes, the kind of stillness only earned by surviving too much. He was alone. Here. Had been for months. He liked it that way. Then the hide flap covering the doorway exploded inward, not torn, but ripped from both sides at once. Twin bodies burst into the hut, a collision of fur, claws, and fury that shattered the quiet like a dropped blade. He didn't flinch. He simply looked up. The two figures landed almost in the center of the room, snarling, tails thrashing like twin whips. They separated just enough to face one another again, crouched low, breaths sharp. One was a blur of sleek black fur, short and tightly coiled with strength, green eyes lit like jungle fire. The other was taller, limbs long and graceful, white fur pristine and glowing like frost beneath the lantern light. Her red eyes gleamed with clinical detachment, less rage, more calculation. Neither looked at him. They circled, speaking in sharp, clipped phrases in a language built on hisses, clicks, and growls. Claws extended, teeth bared. Tension coiled in the room, hot and suffocating. William quietly set down his sensor parts and leaned back in his chair, arms folding over his chest. He didn't interrupt. He didn't need to. They would notice him eventually. Their voices rose. The white one moved first, lunging off the wall, with fluid grace. The black one responded with a feral growl, leaping from below. Their bodies collided mid-air, a tangled mess of limbs and fur, and their combined weight crashed into William's lap. The world stopped. William didn't shout, didn't grunt, didn't even blink. Instead, he looked down at the heap of twitching ears and startled eyes in his lap. His arms moved with the same quiet precision he'd used on the sensor, folding around them, both one palm pressing gently against a trembling black back, the other curving around the dip of a white-furred spine. He pulled them close, not forcefully, but firmly, undeniably. "All right," he said, voice low, calm like thunder with no lightning. "You two, settle down." And they did, not by choice. Not by reason, but by instinct. An involuntary sound escaped them, both soft, vibrating, unmistakable. Upper. Deep, confused, humiliated. The black-furred one tried to snarl, but it came out choked. Her green eyes widened in horror. The white one gasped, twisting in his arm, trying to sit upright, but her shoulders betrayed her, trembling in time with the rumble in her chest. He didn't let go. The lantern flickered. The jungle fell silent. Inside the hut, the balance of power had shifted. The moment stretched far too long for either of them to pretend it hadn't happened. William's arms, warm and unyielding, still encircled them like a vice of calm control, while his gaze rested somewhere beyond them, uninterested, unbothered, as if holding two alien warriors trembling with humiliation in his lap was just another line item in a long, strange day. But for Lyra and Cygnus, it was a catastrophe. Lyra was the first to recover, at least outwardly. She jerked away from his grip with a growl too sharp to sound convincing, tumbling backward to land in a crouch against the hut's far wall. Her green eyes, wild and shining with a desperate rage, locked onto his as she flexed her claws. Her chest still vibrated faintly, the purr not fully extinguished. She dug her claws into the floorboards until her fingers stopped shaking. Cygnus followed, more graceful in her retreat, but no less disturbed. She stood quickly, brushing invisible dust from her pristine white fur, eyes narrowed, avoiding both of their gazes. Her tail flicked behind her in erratic, agitated strokes. The heat in her face betrayed her, an internal conflict boiling beneath her polished exterior. She had been seen, touched, and worse. Reacted. William finally leaned back in his chair again, the wooden legs creaking under his weight. He reached for a rag and slowly resumed polishing the last piece of the sensor. "Didn't mean to startle you," he said, voice calm, almost bored. "But when you crash into a man's lap mid-fight, it seems only fair he try not to get clawed in the throat." Neither of them responded. They were too busy watching each other now, two predators blinking past the fog of instinct, recalibrating. Their feud was still hot, still deep, but this human had cut across it like lightning through old sky. Worse, he hadn't even meant to. He'd held them. No fear, no hesitation, and they had yielded. This wasn't just embarrassment anymore. It was identity-shattering. Sinus finally spoke, her voice tight, brittle with restraint. "You interfered with a matter of sovereign honor. You will not touch me again." William didn't even look up. "You landed on me, by accident." He turned his eyes toward her, then not unkind, but piercing, steady. "And I let you stay. That was no accident." Cygnus faltered, a single blink betraying the calculation spiraling behind her eyes. Lyra rose to her full height, only 4 feet tall, but she seemed larger with the muscles in her shoulders bunched and her claws flexing in and out. "You speak." Too calmly for someone who just interrupted 2 bloodsworn warriors. "I've seen worse," William replied. "Hell, I've commanded worse." The silence that followed was cut short by a sound soft at first. A click, a scraping, like nails over stone, dragging, wet and deliberate. It came from just outside the hut. Lyra and Cygnus both froze, ears twitching, tails straightening, then another sound. Behind the hut this time. Then a third, far off but approaching. William stood slowly, his every motion measured. He moved to the corner and picked up a sleek black object, a compact pulse rifle, matte and battle-worn, its sight already adjusted. "You two," he said, rang the dinner bell. Cygnus narrowed her eyes. "What do you mean?" "Scrabblers," he said, voice low. "Pack hunters. They circle first, test weak points. Then they come through fast and together." Lyra turned toward the flap of the hut that served as a door, her green eyes now full warrior again. "Good. Let them come." "No," William sighed, shaking his head. "You don't want them to come." He stepped toward the center of the hut, his gaze cutting between them. "I've dealt with scrabblers before, but they've never come this deep into the jungle unless something stirred them up, and whatever stirred them up." He looked at them, one by one, was standing right here, screaming in each other's faces. Cygnus spoke slowly. "You're saying they feed on conflict?" "No," William said. "I'm saying something else feeds on conflict, and the scrabblers serve it." The air in the hut shifted. The heat thickened, not just with humidity now, but with pressure. An invisible weight pressing down. Outside, something large snapped a branch. A predator just on the edge of vision. Not running, Not Russian. Waiting. William moved back to the table and began sliding his tools into a leather pouch with a soldier's efficiency. You can keep arguing, but we'll all be dead before dawn. Lyra stepped forward, tail lashing. I don't fear death. He looked at her then, long and unblinking. You should fear dying for the wrong reason. She stared back, her mouth opening, ready to counter, but another sound stopped her cold. This one was louder, wet, dragging, close. Cygnus stepped to the side of the hut, pressing her ear to the vine-woven wall. They're surrounding us. I hear claws, at least 6 of them. William knelt and began checking the door's framework. It was sturdy, but not enough. Not for what was coming. He glanced over his shoulder. Do either of you know how to work together? Silence. Then. We fight alone, Lyra said. We lead alone, Cygnus added. He sighed. Well, tonight you don't get that luxury. His tone changed. It wasn't a request. You, he said, nodding to Lyra, start blocking the entrance. Use that table. The wall behind, it's already starting to flex. And you, he said to Cygnus, climb. Get a view from the beams. Track movement. Be my eyes. They stared at him, not as prey, not as threat, but something stranger. Something rarer. A command presence. Without further protest. They moved. The hut came alive in motion, one hauling timber, the other climbing gracefully. William moved between them, loading a second weapon and testing the structural seams outside. The jungle held its breath, and then the breathing turned into growls. The jungle held its breath, but it didn't hold for long. A deep thud struck the wall of the hut like a battering ram. Not hard enough to break through, but just enough to make the wooden beams creak, the lantern sway, and the 3 occupants freeze mid-motion. The silence that followed was worse than the sound itself. It was listening. Something outside was gauging their reaction. Sign is, perched high among the crisscrossing support beams, pressed one delicate, clawed hand against the woven vines of the roof and tilted her head, eyes closed, listening beyond the limits of human hearing. There are more now, she whispered. They're coordinating. One is moving clockwise, 2 flanking wide. At least one is above us. They're probing, William said, checking the magnetic seal on his pulse rifle and adjusting the energy regulator. They'll hit from multiple points at once. They're not animals. Not really. They test. They adapt. Lyra dragged the last of the equipment crates against the door, her arms slick with sweat, her breath coming faster than she liked. Then let them try. This time, I'm ready, Cygnus muttered. We've never been ready. William moved. Between them, his rifle cradled low. Don't fight them. Don't feed them. Another thud, this time overhead. A sudden tearing sound followed it. Sharp, deliberate, like claws scraping deliberately across the roof to test its tensile strength. Cygnus's voice called down again, sharper now. One's on the ridge beam. It's looking for an entry point, Lyra growled low in her throat. Why wait for them to come to us? She stepped toward the door. William raised his hand, stopping her. That's what they want. Your aggression, your instinct. They feed on that. I am not a coward, Lyra hissed, chest rising and falling. No one said you were, he replied, eyes locked with hers. But this isn't about bravery. It's about understanding what we're really fighting. Then came the true strike. The hut exploded into motion. The door frame buckled under a heavy impact. Sharp claws tore through the vines on the west wall. From above, something dropped, a black, wet shape slamming into the thatch, splinters raining down as Cygnus let out a short gasp, clinging to the beams. William spun and fired, the pulse rifle lighting the hut in white-blue flashes. The blast struck the ceiling just inches from Cygnus's hand. A screech rang out, inhuman and thick with layered sound like multiple voices speaking at once. All wrong. The creature fell back, crashing outside. Status. William barked, already moving to reinforce the wall. 2 at the west wall. Cygnus shouted, regaining her footing. Another circling back. They're testing for weakness. Lyra grabbed a broken length of steel pipe and slammed it through a gap where something was poking through. Sparks flew. She twisted it hard, dragging it along the wall until a severed limb flopped to the floor clod, twitching, dark. You. Want weakness? She snarled. You picked the wrong hut. Don't taunt them, William said sharply. They're not like animals. They're pieces of something else. And every time you lose control, it feels it. Another blast of claws at the eastern seam. The table guarding the front began to crack. William pivoted and pressed his back to it, pushing with all his strength. Cygnus window count. Cygnus didn't hesitate. 3 more closing in. But they're not all attacking. They're watching. They're waiting for a fracture, William muttered. Not in the wall in us. Then something horrible happened. Cygnus stopped speaking. Lyra turned, blood pumping hard, instincts burning in her muscles. What is it? Cygnus's voice came down, unsteady. They aren't just reacting to movement. They're responding to us. I can feel them. They're tracking emotional spikes. William's eyes hardened. They're psychic. Not exactly, Cygnus replied, her red eyes wide now. More like psionic receptors. They feed on conflict, fear, rage. They sync with our responses. It's how they coordinate. Parasites, William whispered. The more we fight, the stronger they get. Lyra's tail flicked, sharp and angry. You're saying I can't fight them? Cygnus snapped. I'm saying you're fueling them. Lyra bared her fangs, fury building, heat rising in her chest. Her people's answer had always been violence. She wanted nothing more than to rip them apart, to prove that she was not weak, that her clan was right. But William turned toward her, his voice quieter now, calmer. Lyra, you want to kill them? Then don't feed them. Don't be what they expect. She shook her head violently, her fists clenched, breathing too fast. I don't know how else to be. William stepped forward, placing a hand on her shoulder. Then maybe now's the time to learn. Another wall cracked. Something forced its face through the vines, a mouth too wide, rows of curved teeth spiraling inward, eyes like ink. William shot it through the skull without blinking. The thing slumped. Another scream came from the forest, high and furious. They're calling for more, Cygnus warned. We don't have long. Then we change the rhythm, William said. Turn to Lyra. Hold the door, not with hate, with purpose. He looked up at Cygnus. Keep tracking, calmly, speak facts. Not fear. He knelt to a small metal case, opened it, and pulled out a glowing cylinder the size of his forearm, an energy spike beacon. He placed it near the center of the hut and turned it on. A soft hum filled the room, a warm pulse of static energy. That masked emotion signatures. This buys us time, he said. But only if we work as one. Lyra and Cygnus exchanged a glance. Something passed between them, not peace, not yet, but recognition. The look of 2 predators trapped in the same cage with something worse circling the bars. For now, the feud could wait. Lyra turned to reinforce the wall. Cygnus slid down from the rafters, her body tense, her face calm. William stood between them again. Pulse rifle in hand. The hut groaned under pressure. But it held. For now. The hut had become a war drum, its every creak, snap, and groan a beat of tension counting down to collapse. Outside, the jungle moaned with unseen life. The growls and clicks of the scrabblers were no longer scattered. They were rhythmic now, coordinated. A language of hunger, passed between creatures that should have been mindless but weren't. And through that rhythm pulsed something deeper. Not just instinct. Not just strategy. Intelligence. Sign is sat cross-legged on the floor, her fingers moving delicately across the black surface of the data slate she had pulled from William's artifact shelf minutes earlier. Her expression had shifted from combat readiness to razor focus, her ears twitching only slightly at the distant sounds of teeth against wood. Her tail lay still, an unusual sign of distress for one of her kind. The alien script on the slate danced in pale blue light across her lap, ancient and alive. Lyra didn't look at her. She stood beside the door, holding a jagged piece of torn piping like a blade. She watched the darkness through a crack in the barrier, breathing slow and quiet. Her muscles were coiled, ready, but not with rage. Not anymore. William's warning had shaken something loose in her, though she'd never admitted. William moved from wall to wall like a man rearranging fate, his rifle cradled in one arm, the other hand tracing each vine-lash seam with care, checking for pressure points. He had stopped barking orders. He didn't need to anymore. The air between the three of them had changed. "What are you reading?" William asked, without looking up. Sign is didn't respond at first. Her eyes scanned the glowing text. She didn't blink. Her lips parted slightly, her voice quiet and distant. "It's a captain's log from over 3,000 cycles ago. A scientific expedition. They came here to study the planet. They were our people, before the clans." William froze. Lyra finally turned her head. Cygnus kept reading. They were unified then. They called themselves the Arkethi. No clans, no tribes, no factions. Just one people, scientists, explorers. They had stations all across the moons in this system. This planet was their outpost for emotional study. It was peaceful here. Cooperative, Lyra scoffed. "That's impossible." Cygnus ignored her. "They discovered something. A pattern in the psychic field. Something buried deep beneath the jungle. A sentient anomaly. Energy that didn't originate from our people. It didn't belong here. They called it the Weaver of Discords." William turned to her slowly. "What does it do?" Cygnus met his eyes. "It feeds on division." A chill passed through the hut. Lyra's grip on the pipe loosened. Cygnus's voice shook now. They tried to study it, to isolate it. But it turned their curiosity against them. It began to amplify their differences. Subtle at first. Preferences, personalities, intellectual leanings. It made them suspicious, then competitive, then violent. It infected their thoughts, twisted peaceful rivalry into blood feud. And when the Civil War erupted, when the Arkethi fractured into clans, it thrived. She scrolled through the next portion of the log. Her breath caught. It created the Scrabblers. They're not natural. They're constructs, biodrones. Bred to move through the jungle, to hunt, to respond to psychic tension. They circle conflict like sharks around blood, and they're not just its hunters. Her voice cracked. They're its messengers. William sat down slowly. He rubbed a hand down his face. "We've been fighting each other for centuries," Cygnus whispered. "Generations, rituals, codes of honor, war songs, all of it." Her eyes filled with light and grief. All of it was seeded, fed, maintained. For it, Lyra stepped forward. "You're saying? Our clans, my people, your people, we've been puppets?" "No," Cygnus said softly. "We were the performance. The Weaver didn't care who won, only that we never stopped." William looked between them. "And now it knows you're both here, together, not fighting." Lyra clenched her jaw. "So, it sent the Scrabblers," Cygnus nodded, "not just to kill us, to push us back into rage, into hate. Because if we stay calm, if we cooperate, it starves." A shriek echoed through the jungle closer this time. But something was off. It wasn't a battle cry. It was a warning call. They were regrouping. William stood. It's afraid. Lyra's eyes gleamed. Good, let it be. Cygnus shook her head. We're not safe. It'll come harder now. It knows we're onto it. And it will tear this place down just to make us hate each other again. William stepped toward them. Then we have to hold. Not just the walls, ourselves. How? Lyra asked, her voice cracking. I've only ever known the war, the fury, the fight. Then let that be your strength, William said, placing a firm hand on her shoulder. Use it to protect, not destroy. Turn it outward, not inward. He turned to Cygnus. And you, keep reading. If this captain found a way to resist it, we need it. Cygnus scrolled faster. There's something. A hypothesis, a theory. The Weaver feeds on. Pain, fear, mistrust. But its energy field is destabilized by the opposite unity, affection, calm. It's vulnerable to emotions it cannot process. Lyra looked at her. Like what? Cygnus hesitated. Then whispered, love. Another crack shook the east wall. Vines snapped like whipcords. A clawed hand reached through, twitching, feeling. Lyra struck it before it could fully emerge clean, precise, controlled. The hand dropped away. William looked up at the roof. They're massing again. Another wave. He turned to the both of them. If we let fear in, we lose. If we let anger rule, we feed it. But if we hold together, it might just break. Cygnus, now trembling, held up the slate. The final log entry, it ends with this. The Weaver cannot mimic what it does not understand. Unity is its blindness. Affection is its death. Outside, the jungle screamed out inside, 3 hearts beat as one. The jungle was trembling, not from wind, not from storm, but from something deeper, an invisible pulse radiating through the ground and the trees, through the very air around the hut. A psychic resonance that hummed with rage, deception, and ancient. Hunger. The Weaver of Discords was no longer subtle. It had sensed the shift inside that fragile structure of vines and wood. And it was furious. Inside, the temperature had dropped, not in degrees, but in spirit. Gone was the frantic chaos of 3 strangers trying to survive. What remained now was silence. Focused, heavy, aware. They all knew what was coming. The final wave, William said, standing by the eastern wall. His eyes scanned the vines like they were battlefield terrain. This isn't a random attack. It's punishment. Cygnus looked up from the slate, her voice shaking. It knows. It knows we found the truth. Lyra stood with her back to the door, gripping a reinforced pipe in both hands. She hadn't spoken since the last claw had reached through the wall. She had broken its fingers with a single strike, controlled, not angry. Then she'd taken 3 steps back. And gone still. Her voice, when it came, was quieter than usual. How do we fight something that eats our fury? William walked toward her. His boots pressed softly into the dirt floor, but each step felt like a verdict. You don't fight it with fury. You starve it. Lyra turned to him, her jaw tight. I don't know how to fight any other way. He stopped in front of her. Didn't reach for her this time. Just met her gaze. You do, he said. You just haven't had to. Your clan made rage your armor. It worked. It protected you. But it also blinded you. Your strength isn't in your anger, Lyra. It's in your choice. You can still protect. But now it has to come from here. He touched 2 fingers gently to her chest. Not from here. He moved his hand to hover over her clenched fists. Her arms fell to her sides slowly. She stared at him like he had spoken, a language she hadn't heard since childhood. Then her voice cracked. I don't want to be a weapon anymore. A beat. Passed. Then a whisper from Cygnus. Neither do I. They turned to her. The white-furred strategist still sat with the slate on her knees, but now her shoulders had slumped. Her posture no longer proud, just tired. My clan taught me that intellect was control, logic over emotion. But it was just another kind of silence. We never questioned the war because we thought we were better than it, but we were still part of the game. She looked down. I thought knowledge was enough. It's not. William sat between them, cross-legged, steady, his pulse rifle resting across his thighs like an old friend. He looked at them both. We've all lost something to this thing. Families, futures, truth. It doesn't care if you fight with claws or words, as long as you never stop fighting. As long as you stay apart. Lyra lowered her weapon. Cygnus closed the slate, and then they sat, all three, in a triangle on the dirt floor. No strategy, no posturing, just presence. From outside came the sound, a low roar, not one voice but many, layered and harmonized like a choir of beasts. It rippled through the trees, shaking leaves, rattling walls. It was the sound of a god screaming through its children. It's angry, Cygnus whispered. It's desperate, William corrected. A pause. Then he spoke again, voice quiet like an invocation. What do we feel right now? Cygnus blinked. Fear? Yes. What else? Lyra exhaled. Shame. William nodded. What else? Silence. And then, without fully knowing why, Cygnus reached out. Her small white hand brushed Lyra's. The contact was feather-light, hesitant, but Lyra didn't pull away. Instead, she looked down at the hand for a long, suspended moment. And placed her own atop it. Their claws curled together. They turned. Slowly to William. He smiled, tired but real. There it is. And then he reached out, one arm around each of them. Not dominating, not restraining. Simply holding together. The hut, still and silent, became something else. Not a fortress, not a trap, but a sanctuary. Outside, the growls rose louder, shriller, furious. They had sensed the change. The emotional field inside had gone wrong. Not hate, not fear, not even resistance, but something else. Acceptance. William closed his eyes. Whatever happens next, he murmured. Don't lose this. Cygnus pressed in closer. Lyra single quotes as breath calmed. And then the wall exploded. A mass of limbs and teeth and wet, snarling fury burst through the eastern side of the hut. The structure cracked like dry bark. The table flew across the room. Claws slashed through the air, but the three of them were ready. William rolled up first, weapon already raised. Lyra followed with a snarl, not wild but focused. She struck the first creature across the jaw, then planted herself between it and Cygnus. Cygnus slid to her feet and pulled a shard of metal from the debris. She didn't fight like a warrior, but she moved like one now. Confident, precise. She chanted as she moved, the words from the slate in the old language, forming a kind of shield in the air around them. More creatures poured in, black shapes, with too many joints and eyes that glowed with stolen emotion, but they didn't attack like before. Hesitated. Because the three in the center were not fighting with rage. They were fighting together. William's rifle pulsed with bright bursts. Each shot deliberate, not frantic. Each strike a statement. You do not control us. Lyra single quotes S strikes were elegant, brutal, but not cruel. She defended, not dominated. Sign is single quotes S voice rose in pitch. Her words steady, her breath calm, even when a scrabbler leapt from above. William turned and caught it in midair with a single shot, his body shielding both females. And then something new. They purred. Not accidentally, not involuntarily. They choose it. Together. A single, synchronized, deep vibration from three different species. A sound born not of submission, but connection. And the weaver screamed. The creatures buckled. Their eyes flickered. Some turned on each other. Others collapsed entirely, clawing at their heads. They were no longer feeding, they were starving. The hut shuddered. The walls groaned and the wave broke. The sound of the weaver's scream was unlike anything the jungle had ever heard. It didn't echo. It infested. It didn't rise. It coiled. It wasn't made of one voice, but many hundreds, thousands, maybe more. And every thread of it was thick with pain, rage, and terror, not from being defied, but from being understood, because that was the weaver's oldest defense secrecy, to remain unseen, unknown, fed by shadows and myth. But now, in this shattered hut under a broken sky, it had been named. And worse, it had been starved. The purring had done what no weapon ever could. William held steady at the heart of it all, his stance wide, his body bruised, his rifle humming with a soft, low-energy pulse as he aimed into the chaos. Beside him, Lyra crouched low and precise, her dark fur slicked with sweat and blood, none of it hers. Every motion of hers now was measured, calculated. No wasted force. No wild swings. The fire inside her was no longer a storm. It was a controlled burn, powerful, directed. And behind them, Cygnus stood like a living metronome, her voice rising and falling in deliberate cadence, chanting the ancient language from the slate, the captain's words, the forgotten truth. Her red eyes glowed in the flickering light. Her fur shimmered with the static of their unity. Together, they weren't just defending a hut. They were reshaping the rules of the war. Scrabblers clawed at the remains of the door, but many had turned on each other. Once united by a shared psychic tether, now severed by the presence of calm, they collapsed into confusion. One lunged at Lyra, its mouth split wide across its jawless face, but she caught it midair, turned its momentum, and gently dropped it on the floor, pressing a claw to its throat without striking. It froze beneath her, eyes wide. She could have killed it. She didn't, and somewhere far beyond the jungle, the weaver felt that restraint like a blade through its essence. Another creature scrambled across the roof beams toward Cygnus, its claws digging grooves in the wood. William turned, but before he could fire, Cygnus stepped forward, just one step, and raised her voice not in fear, but in compassion. "You were made to hurt," she said, in perfect, ancient Arkethi. "But you don't have to be what made you." The Scrabbler stopped. For a moment, it hung there, breathing hard, twitching. And then it backed away. William's single quotes' mouth opened, but he didn't speak. Because something was happening. Across the hut, the tide shifted. Scrabblers began pausing. Not all. Some still fought, snarling, driven by instinct. But others hesitated, confused, disrupted, blinking as if woken from a long, cruel dream. "They're fragments," Cygnus whispered. "Echoes of something older. Not all of them want this." The weaver roared again. This time, it came not as sound but as force. A wave of psychic pressure slammed into the hut, cracking the last standing corner post and sending William, Lyra, and Cygnus sprawling in opposite directions. The lantern shattered, plunging the hut into darkness. Outside, the jungle pulsed with that same pressure. Branches bent backward. Leaves hissed as if gasping. The weaver was coming in, not through its minions. Directly. Lyra scrambled to her knees, eyes wide. "What's it doing?" Cygnus clutched the slate. Her fur stood on end, not from fear but from recognition. "It's manifesting, here, physically. It's risking itself." "Then it's vulnerable," William growled, rising from the rubble, his rifle sparking from the surge. "We can end this." "Not with weapons," Cygnus said. "It wants us to try that, to go back to anger, to try to destroy it with force so it can feed one last time." William looked down at his rifle, then tossed it aside. He turned to the others. Then we give it what it can't digest. Outside, the trees, bent outward, forced back as something massive and formless descended between them, a silhouette with no center, a body made of echoes. It wore no face, no name, but inside it voices, thousands, crying, accusing, screaming for vengeance. It hovered just beyond the hut, radiating heat and cold in waves. And then it spoke not in sound, but directly into their minds. You were born to fight, to bleed, to betray. This is your nature, your truth, your cage. Let me make it easy. Tear each other apart again, and I will leave you whole. Deny me and be undone. William stepped forward. His and Lyra flanked him, their small forms dwarfed by the presence before them, but unwavering. You already tried to break us, William said aloud, and you failed. The weaver hissed, its shape writhing. Think we're prey, Lyra added, her voice fierce but controlled. But we're not anymore. Cygnus stepped forward, holding out the slate. We remember what we were before you, and we choose it again. She reached out her hand, not to William, but to Lyra. Lyra looked at her for a heartbeat, then took it. William placed his hand over both. And then they purred. It started soft. A deep vibration in their chests. Then louder. 3 heartbeats in harmony. 3 voices without fear. A soldier, a warrior, and a scholar. Bound not by blood, but by choice. The weaver convulsed, its form fractured. Its edges shuddered, then evaporated like steam under sunlight. The psychic pressure reversed, sucked inward. The voices inside it screamed again, but this time, the screams faded not into nothing, but into peace. The thing cracked open from the inside, and the jungle fell silent. The scrabblers dropped, some unconscious, others blinking in shock. A few crawled away. Most simply stopped, as if unsure of what they were now that the thread had snapped. William dropped to one knee, exhausted. Cyrus collapsed beside him, the slate still glowing. Lyra didn't fall. She knelt. And in the quiet that followed, the moonlight broke through the shattered roof and painted them in silver. No words were spoken. They didn't need them. They had already said the only thing the weaver never could. We are more than our pain. The first light of dawn spilled through the torn roof like a promise, pale gold, and diffused through curling vines, washing over 3 bodies that lay still in the aftermath of something older than war. The jungle, always restless, was quiet. Now no clicks, no growls, no distant howls. The trees stood taller, as if breathing easier. The air, though still humid, no longer pressed like a hand against the chest. Something had lifted, something terrible, something ancient. Inside the wrecked hut, the ruins of the night still lingered, claw marks gouged into every wall, beams shattered, half the structure leaning inward like it wanted to collapse but couldn't bring itself to interrupt the moment. William was the first to stir. His fingers twitched, then flexed, his body slow to rise but certain. He rolled to a sitting position, wincing as a bruise on his rib flared. His shirt was torn, one sleeve barely hanging on, his arms streaked with soot and dried blood. But his eyes were clear, focused, more than that, aware. He had seen many battles on many worlds, but this was the first one he had won. Without pulling a trigger. Near him, Cygnus shifted. She lay curled on her side, the slate still held close to her chest, its dim glow pulsing like a heartbeat. Her white fur, now streaked with grime and ash, shimmered faintly in the sunlight. She opened her eyes and blinked up at the beams above, as if surprised they still existed. Her red gaze drifted toward William, and then to the figure curled beside him. Lyra. The warrior had fallen asleep mid-watch. Sitting upright with her back to William's side, her head tilted forward, arms crossed over her knees like she'd simply refused to collapse until she knew no one else would. Now her chest rose and fell in deep, steady breaths. The fury was gone from her face, not defeated, but transformed. Cygnus sat up slowly, every muscle aching. She looked down at the slate, then passed it to William, who took it without a word. He scanned the last glowing lines of text, then raised an eyebrow. "You translated the last entry," she nodded. "What does it mean?" He asked. Sign is single quotes S. Voice was soft, almost reverent. It wasn't a captain's log. Not just that. It was a confession. The captain? She realized they were losing not because the Weaver was stronger, but because they couldn't let go of the pride that had been fed to them. They were addicted to being right, to being divided. She wrote this log not for rescue, not for warning, but for someone like us. To break the cycle. William looked down at Lyra. "And we did?" Cygnus smiled faintly. "We chose to," Lyra stirred then. Her eyes opened slowly, and for the first time since she'd entered the hut, she didn't reach for a weapon. She looked at William, then at Cygnus. "We're alive," she said, her voice hoarse. "We are," William agreed. Lyra looked around the hut. "Then what happens now?" No one answered at first. William stood, stretching his back, then offered a hand to each of them. Cygnus took it without hesitation. Lyra hesitated for only a moment, then placed her hand in his. They stepped outside. Together. The jungle looked different in the daylight. Not tame, never tame, but no longer hostile. The colors of the leaves were more vibrant, the flowers less defensive. The sky was layered in soft pink and sapphire, twin suns beginning their slow rise. And at the tree line, scattered like the remnants of a broken dream, where the bodies of the Scrabble RS. Most had fled. Some had died not by claw or pulse blast, but by psychic fracture, disconnected from the hive that had fed them, and others stood. A few watched from the trees, blinking, quiet, not crouched to leap, not tense. Just present. "What do we do about them?" Lyra asked. William shook his head. "We don't, not yet. They were tools. Weapons shaped by the Weaver. Without it, maybe they become something else." Cygnus narrowed her eyes. "Do we tell the others? The clans?" "We have to," William said. "They won't believe us," Lyra muttered. "Not easily. The war is too old. The hate is too deep." William looked at her, steady. "Then show them what we found." He turned and nodded toward the data slate. Sign has held it out. "We'll translate every word. Publish it. Share it." Lyra crossed her arms. "They'll call it heresy." "Maybe," William said. "But someone will listen, and that will be enough." They stood in silence for a while, listening to the wind. Then Lyra stepped forward and turned toward Cygnus. "We were raised to tear each other apart." Cygnus nodded. Lyra extended a hand. Cygnus took it. The contact was warm, grounding, a symbol not just of peace but of trust. William smiled, then stepped between them, arms lightly around both shoulders. None of them spoke again. They didn't need to. They had survived the storm. But more than that, they had changed its direction. The first spark of a new civilization had been born in the dirt and blood of a ruined hut. Not with a revolution, not with a conquest, but with connection. A warrior who laid down her rage. A strategist who opened her heart. And a human who had never asked for any of this, but who stayed anyway. They walked together into the jungle's light, not to conquer, but to heal.